video, I want to talk to you about the value of taking certain types of tracks and bringing them together in groups, otherwise known as buses or mixbuses. Now, what this enables you to do is it enables you to change the volume of a group of parts with a single movement of a fader, rather than having to go individually into each part and meticulously change the volume. So this is useful especially when you're getting to the mixdown stage in a track, because it encourages much more of a big picture mindset as opposed to that like real sort of detailed mindset that you've had in creating the track and in maybe forensically looking at the EQ and all the rest of it of each part. The whole principle of this is it just really simplifies the process of being able to balance out different types of parts within your track, and it's super valuable. So I'm just going to, with this project here, just run through a couple of techniques and show you several reasons why this is a great thing to do in your own projects. Now on the screen we have 8 parts, and I'm just going to play this sequence to you, and you'll notice that the top 5 parts are distinctly different from the lower 3 parts on the screen. Let's just give it a listen. You can see that the top 5 parts are all rhythmic and the lower 3 parts are basically effects sounds. Now I'm happy with the way that the drums are balanced as a drum kit, and I'm also happy with the way that the effects are balanced as a unit of sound. So when I'm looking to make changes here, I don't particularly want to be getting into each individual channel to change the levels. If, for example, I wanted to make the drums slightly quieter, that would be a huge amount of work. And not only that, by changing the different volume levels within your parts, you can also change the relationship between their wet and dry balance if you happen to be sending a quantity of that sound to an effects return channel. Because there is an easy way of actually doing this by clicking on the part that you want to change the sound of, the group of parts, and then holding shift and clicking the lower of these parts, I can select all 3. And that means that when I change the volume here, you can see that the volume is changing on all 3 parts. Now that's fine if you don't have any effects return content being sent, so you're not then going to affect the wet dry balance. And it's fine also as long as you don't have any volume automation. If you do have any automation on your volume here, then you're going to create basically the volume automation is going to override these changes that you're making with the mouse. So the best way to avoid that is to put them into a mixbus or a group. So select the parts that you want to appear in a group, and then you right click on any of them. You see this dialog come up where it says group tracks. Now you can see that this almost parenthesis has taken place between the 3 parts, and what it does, I'm just going to rename it effects, it's easier to see. You can see now that these 3 parts are being routed to this group, the effects group, and the effects group itself is then going out to the master. So we haven't changed, the fact that these sounds are all going to be part of our master mix, but what we have done is we've given ourselves this brand new fader to play with, which will control the volume of all of these different parts as one unit. Now you can see that, and I'll just play the track here while I'm illustrating it. And what I'll do is I'll just pull down this fader of the Mixbus that we've just created, and you'll notice that actually none of the levels here of the individual channels change. It's just the overall level that's changing. So let's have a listen. And as you can see, that's a really easy way of just changing all of those, the level of all of those sounds at once. Now let's do a similar thing with the drums. We're just going to select the bottom or the top of those, press the shift key to select them all. Now you can see we've selected all 5. We're going to go in and click on group tracks. You can see here that there is like an Apple G shortcut here, Command G, and that will, basically group the tracks immediately for you without having to open up this dialog. Now you can see that we have a new group here for our drums, and we're going to rename it and press return. And you can see now that these parts are all being routed through this fader, so it's like a funnel that all of this sound is now going into. Over the course of a project, you might find that you end up having, say, 10 different mix buses. And as an illustration, you might have drums, bass, effects, vocals, strings, pads, lead sounds. Really depends on the components that you have in your track, and also on what just makes more sense to you as a producer. Sometimes with my tracks, I'll actually have all the top end percussion on its own mix bus, and that leads me on to just talking very briefly about how you can actually create subgroups within these groups. Why would that be useful? Doesn't it start getting more complicated? Well, actually what it does is it potentially simplifies the way that we deal with our audio. You can see that within this drum bus we have 5 loops. Now we have some shakers, and we have a kick drum and a snare drum. I'm going to take the shakers and I'm going to move it up to where the loops are here, because the loops and the shakers are all effectively drum loops rather than individual hits. So what we can do within this group in Ableton is we can select a number of parts that we want to subgroup, and then let's do that little shortcut of Command or Apple G. And now we can rename these as loop subgroup. That is atrocious spelling, my apologies. And you can see that this little dialogue here comes up, this little icon comes up next to the main group, and in fact next to any group. And what this dialog or icon allows you to do is when you click it, basically just collapses the view. And what that does is it can very quickly simplify your project, make it easier to see the big picture stuff, and just organize the screen so it doesn't end up being 100 parts of mess. So let's just open up the drum bus again, and we have now created this bus within a bus. Now, to keep things a little bit more organized, I'm just going to create another one here of these individual parts, and these would just be single drums, and we're going to call that subgroup. And I can collapse that, and I can also collapse this this loop subgroup. So it just gives us a bit more independent control over these parts. Now obviously that allows us to say we were trying to mix the drums internally, but they were quite complex to mix. What we could do is if we decided, say, that the loops were a little bit on the loud side, we could take the loops down uniformly. And conversely, if we decided these single drums were a bit heavy, we could take those down, or we could mute them all together if we decided that they weren't really adding any value to the track. So you can see that this is a really flexible system. I just want to talk a little bit about color coding now and organizing your project. You'll notice that these primary groups that I've created or mix buses are capitalized, and I do that really as a naming convention, so that if I'm ever doing a multi-stem export and exporting all of the individual parts to my hard drive, including all of the groups, it's a very quick way of just being able to see which ones are groups of sounds and which are the individual channels or even the subgroups. And that's why I labeled the subgroups with subgroup. The other thing that I like to look at doing to organize the session is color coding. So for example, we have the drums with a big kind of bracket around it. Now these loops, to differentiate them slightly from the other parts, we might choose a slightly different color, and you might create a slightly different bracketed color, or go for the same bracketed color, and then with these single drums perhaps choose again a different color. I tend to go for things that are on a variation of the same kind of color scheme for each part. It just makes it a little bit easier on the eye and a little bit easier to follow. Now if you did want to change all of the individual parts, because you notice that by changing the channel color, I haven't actually made any changes to the colors of the individual parts. Now you can select these by clicking on the top or the bottom of the selection whilst holding down the shift key, so you've selected all three, and now I can click on them, right click on any of them, bring up this little dialog, and we can create these as the same color as this group. So it just, you know, operates as a means of sort of neatening things up. One of the other great benefits of having groups as well is processing. So say you wanted to change the EQ quite subtly of the drums that you've put together within your group. Rather than having to go into each individual channel and start messing with the EQ on each individual channel, once you've created a bus, you can simply go to your EQs, take an EQ, drop it on the bus, and then you're able to EQ the entire drums in one go. In the same way, you're able to perhaps add compression to all of the drums in one go. And that can be quite an effective technique at just gelling together the sound of the drums, particularly if you've got lots and lots of different parts. It can be quite an effective way at just consolidating the sound as a singular body. Another super useful thing of having groups is it allows you to use these effects returns across the entire group, and this lovely balanced drum submix that we have will be sent in that lovely balance to the effects return. So, you know, for example, I can just play these drums now, and as I add vocal here using the effects return, you'll hear reverb coming onto the sounds. And that reverb is just being added evenly across the entire drum part. So again, it's another means of using groups just to really gel individual kind of buckets of sound together, and also just to encourage this big picture mindset when you're mixing tracks down, so that you're getting out of that real granular thinking of, you know, surgical EQ and stereo panning and all the rest of it. Anyway, I hope this has helped you understand a little bit more about mix buses and groups and the many different ways that they're valuable to have within your project. If you have enjoyed the video, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for lots more content in this kind of vein. Also, check out my website at mixingmasteringmentoring.com, where I offer one-to-one mentoring sessions as well as mixing and mastering services, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.